Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. My name is Ken Shorten. I'm here with London Paul. And Paul, there's an old axiom that goes, when a man is hanging himself, don't or just continue to offer him the rope. And this is exactly what appears to be happening with Russia and China in regards to Europe, who is hanging themselves by the choices and bad actions that they are making. Paul, I want to thank you as always for being a part of this discussion. And, despite the fact that many in the West are hoping for some type of resolution to the myriad of conflicts going on around the world, at this point in time, it doesn't necessarily behoove Russia and China for them to end.
Yeah, well, obviously, first off, thanks for joining me. I obviously appreciate it as always. Yeah, this is a discussion really, which is, I think China and Russia's beef really is not with Europe, particularly because they know Europe's just a bunch of vassals who, there's differences of opinion inside Europe, but the European Union is a huge problem because of the European Commission in Brussels, which is effectively a vassal state of, or a vassal commission of the United States. So if the US says jump, the commission says how high. So their principal problems they have is with the United States and the United Kingdom. And their philosophy is, and we'll go through all the reasons why this is the case, is if those two nations particularly want to just keep destroying themselves, just leave them to it. If they want to carry on doing what they're doing and wreaking havoc upon themselves, then so be it. And if Europe, because it's a vassal state, wants to be destroyed economically, which of course we know is happening, and Germany being an obvious example of that, they'll say that's your choice. Eventually, you'll have to come to your senses, which they will do eventually. What brings that about isn't the subject for discussion today, but it's just to illustrate a point. So let's look at individually the reasons why. Well, the Ukraine war is an obvious starting point. Now, Russia's made its position very clear and said, right, we intend to keep the four regions, so Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. And obviously, they're not going to give up Crimea either. That was their original statement, and obviously neutrality and no NATO membership, etc., etc. And the West refused to listen to that, didn't do anything to encourage Ukraine to end the war on that basis. And now, of course, that agreement's null and void. Russia hasn't stipulated what its demands are now, but it's basically saying, look, we're happy to sit at the table and have discussions with you, as long as you agree to those conditions, and and then we'll iron all the other problems out in the process. Of course, they're not prepared to do that. So Russia's perspective on this is, well, the war can carry on. We're winning the war. We're going to make massive and continue to make massive inroads into what's left of Ukrainian-controlled Donetsk, etc., etc. So we may then consider taking Nikolaev and Odessa. But if you want the war to carry on, fine. We're prepared to fight it, and we will continue fighting this war for years on that basis, if you like, because here's Russia's perspective on this. In the process of this war being fought, the damage this is doing to the United States is enormous. And it's enormous for these reasons. Firstly, they're the ones who dragged Europe into this. So eventually Europe will come to its senses and go, we can't continue to either finance this war, we can't continue to provide any armaments because we don't have any to give, which is practically at that point in time. We've also had Nord Stream pipeline blown up, which eventually the truth will come out. And as Putin said at BRICS, at Kazan, he went, basically, Nord Stream 2 still works. So if you want that switched on, all they have to do is pick up the phone. In fact, they can switch it on themselves. The gas will start flowing. But this is a political decision why they won't switch it on. Well, that's their choice. We're not here to argue with them. So If Europe wants to wreck itself as well, that's its decision. But the longer the war goes on, there are a number of benefits to Russia. I'm not saying, there are no downsides to this. Of course, because they'll lose more and more Russian military personnel in the process. But the argument's very clear. Till we have an agreement with what our demands are, the war carries on. And the benefits to Russia are the United States has destroyed itself geopolitically. Russia is going from strength to strength in terms of its allies and in terms of like what happened at BRICS and the global south. So Russia's benefited hugely because the United States made the fatal mistake of implementing sanctions the way they did, trying to sanction the Russian central bank, freezing assets, basically stealing them. So Russia goes, if you want to carry on stealing our assets and doing this, fine, because we don't currently have control of them, but this is going to blow up in your face. You're destroying what's left of your hegemony, which is basically non-existent. You're destroying your financial system, your reputation. You're destroying the dollar. That's your choice. We're not going to get in the way of that. And from the Ukrainian perspective, the argument is, well, if they want the war to carry on, well, Russia's made its position very clear all the way along. It wants to demilitarize it. Well, it's basically going to demilitarize it in totality. It's basically demilitarized NATO in the process. So that's another benefit to Russia because it's severely weakened the NATO's capability to provide anything to anyone. So, and we'll come on to China and Taiwan shortly, but that's beneficial to China as well, because even if the United States had some desire to end the war and go to war with China, for argument's sake, which is not going to happen, it's got nothing to fight with because it's given everything to the Ukrainians and, of course, now latterly, everything to the Israelis. So coming back just to the point of Russia, we'll come on to the point of China shortly. This has given Russia basically the idea that, well, if the war carries on because we're not getting what we want, then the war's not going to end anyway, because we're not going to allow it to end on that basis. We're not going to cave in and capitulate. So in the process, the longer the war carries on, the more it will destroy Ukraine and, from their perspective, remove really what they perceive to be the cancer that runs and infests Ukraine's government, etc., its military, whatever. Okay, that's the Russian perspective. Remember, we're just quoting how Russia feels about this. So they're going, well, the longer the war goes on, the more likely that's going to be destroyed in totality, and Ukraine will be gutted to the point it's never going to even remotely consider the prospect of NATO membership. It's never going to be able to get into the European Union because it'd be destroyed in totality. Also, there's all the Western corporations who've put enormous amounts of money, bought up loads of assets there. Well, they're all going to be in serious trouble. So that's good for us as well. So there are a lot of fringe benefits for Russia to say, well, you're not going to give us what we want. So the war carries on. And in the process, the longer it carries on, the US's credibility on the world stage gets more and more diminished. Its military gets weaker. It looks politically inept, which it is. And it also, in the process, really exposes the weaknesses of their own military in the United States, because they're the ones who effectively were responsible for a lot of the plans that were made, which, okay, you can argue Ukraine failed to execute them properly. But equally in the process, it's just caused massive credibility damage to the United States. It's also caused many sort of allies, in inverted commas, to reconsider their position. And India's an example where it's kind of straddled the fence. It now looks like, well, that could change, of course, but it looks like it's now throwing its whole lot in with the multipolar world camp. And there are other nations who also fall into that category. It's caused, because of this Ukraine war and the financing and how it's demilitarized European countries. Europe's now starting to go, well, enough's enough. There's countries had enough of this. They're now starting to talk about wanting their own kind of European, I wouldn't call it European army, but ways of defending itself because it doesn't trust the United States anymore, in part. So this is just gradually weakening the US position. And, there's an old saying, if the enemy wants to destroy itself, don't get in the way of it, just let it carry on. So in some senses, and I say some senses, for Russia, the war carrying on in Ukraine is not a problem. Obviously, if Ukraine says, well, okay, we'll cave in and give you whatever you want, we'll have neutrality, no NATO membership, the country gets broken up, you want additional territory, say Sumy as well, maybe, then on Dnipro possibly, then you can have it all. And then the war ends. Russia goes, well, the war's ending on our terms. And of course, the other thing is by the war ending on Russia's terms, that causes even more damage to the United States, and by extension, the United Kingdom. And also it causes huge damage to NATO's reputation because they fail. Because if Russia gets what it wants, the West can't sit there and claim Russia lost the war. And then what are the people of countries going to say? And it causes instability in those countries. So you can see logically why it makes sense for Russia, as things stand, for the war to carry on, unless they get what they want, because ultimately they'll never admit this, but they do want the West to be destroyed. And why wouldn't they, after what the West tried to do to Russia itself? Okay, they were never going to succeed, but the mere idea and the intention to destroy the entire country, balkanize it, destroy it so it's no longer a nation state, that's as aggressive as it gets without going to direct war with them. So, of course, the Russians have some beef about this.
In many ways, history you'll never know for sure what historians are going to write about this period in time, but there is a good possibility that they could put this conflict in Ukraine, what started out as an SMO, what started out as a Maidan coup, could be a catalyst for, I'm not going to say a world war, but a war that ended empires and changed the geopolitical map. Because many things on the outside, complementary to what happened on the battlefield between Russia and Ukraine, have emerged in many ways due to the responses and actions from Europe, the United States, etc. Europe, which, whether it was just simply China being allied to Russia, decided that they would start doing economic sanctions. They would try to cut the competitiveness with China. China became an adversary in that class. Now, a lot of that too was the United States putting pressure on them, but in this instance as well, the United States started doing, because of those alliances, primarily China with Russia, started putting sanctions and levying export restrictions and etc. What did it do? It forced China to divest of using the rest of the world for its productivity and for its imports, and instead have to produce on its own. Russia the same way. Before the conflict, would Russia have gotten involved with uh, partnering and perhaps subsidizing with Iran to be able to facilitate oil and banking and the things like that, when for the first decade of this century, Iran was under sanctions and Russia really didn't do too much. It was India who was involved in the gold for oil type thing. So the conflict itself has not just created and brought together the adversaries of Russia even stronger, but they've also opened up a lot of other nations to recognize, wow, the entirety of NATO and the United States was thrown at Russia over Ukraine, and it was summarily beat down in less than 2 years. So maybe if we stand together and form alliances with these stronger powers, choosing one of them, over the West, we can have that protection too. We can get out from under the dominion of the West, and we can start setting our own sovereign paths. Well, in many parts, as we've talked about before, the rise of the multipolar world really accelerated after the Maidan coup in 2014. And it's really accelerated since the conflict in Ukraine. And it's seen the downfall of the West every time they seek to do some new implementation, whether it's freeze and steal Russian assets, whether it's to use the dollar as economic warfare, whether it's to force Europe against their own desires to tariff and restrict trade with China. I mean, some of this goes back to when China had already had agreements with Italy and I think possibly the UK to build the Silk Road, the Belt and Road, all the way to Europe. And that was cut and pretty much vilified and stopped as it goes. So all these things that really had been set in motion forced China then to have to reevaluate, and it's been to the detriment. It's kind of funny. I was taking a look earlier this week in the market wrap-ups. The chancellor, I think, of the budget in the UK is saying now they have to redefine the definition of debt to be able to unlock the ability to borrow more and subsidize and get access to capital. Well, had the UK stayed in good graces with China, guess who might be providing the capital the same way that China provided the capital to the United States after 2008 by buying all the treasuries and bailing them out. So a lot of these things that changed simply by having the old world beliefs and being still a vassal to the United States in regards to remaining under Bretton Woods hegemony and not recognizing the power and the future of the multipolar world.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point with regards to sanctions and the damage it's done, of course, that has accelerated the multipolar world in the last, yes, you're right, it's been going on for a decade or even a bit longer, but certainly since the Ukraine war, it's massively accelerated. BRICS, it's massively accelerated all these institutions like the SCO, ASEAN, the Eurasian Economic Union, the list goes on and on. The GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, because they've looked at the United States' behavior and gone, well, we need to do something about this. We need to get out of under the thumb of the dollar, of SWIFT. So, in essence, the longer this carries on and the more strident the United States' behavior is with regards to Ukraine, and we'll just focus on the Ukraine for now, then that benefits the Russia and China as well. So they're another reason why they'll say, well, okay, if Russia doesn't get what it wants, fine, just carry on doing what you're doing because you are destroying yourself, and we'll pretend we don't want this to happen. Of course they want it to happen. They want it to happen to end US hegemony, end the Western Empire, and then to allow the world to flourish, to include the Europeans and eventually the British and the Americans, who will at some point realize this new world's here to stay. So that's the Ukraine. Then you come on to what's going on with regards to the Middle East. Now, of course, China and Russia are appalled by the behavior of Israel, but equally, again, it's one of those situations. They're not in any hurry for this war to end unless it ends in terms of a two-state solution, in terms of a total ceasefire and the end of the war, and obviously all the resolution that needs to happen with Gaza and the West Bank in terms of what's been going on with the Iranians. It all has to end the way they expect it to end. Otherwise, they go, well, the war can carry on because this is causing enormous damage again to the United States because they're supportive of Israel, because they effectively, whether they want to or not, they have no choice because of the Israeli lobby. The UK is rather muted and isn't really getting involved too much with regards to Israel. So that's kind of irrelevant. But the longer this drags on, it also causes enormous damage to Israel. And their philosophy is, well, if Israel gets weaker and weaker and weaker, it makes a two-state solution far more of a likely outcome. So they're going to sit there and go again if the demands aren't met with respect to ending the conflict with Israel and the Palestinians, Hamas, with Hezbollah, etc., then as far as we're concerned, the war carries on because it's going to cause enormous damage, which it has done. And also, again, it's just accelerating the demise of the United States because the world's looking at this going, the global south going, well, again, you're party to the conduct of Israel, and we're appalled by this. And you are the one nation who could prevent this happening. You could cut off all military supplies, you could cut off financial aid, you could make life extremely difficult and end all this, but you're not prepared to do it. So it just makes the United States look like a very, very bad actor in the world, which of course, largely in terms of its foreign policy, that's exactly what it does. Then you come on to the issue of Taiwan. Now, from China's perspective, the United States can sit there and make all these outrageous claims and statements about what China's going to do. It's going to invade Taiwan, etc., and we're going to form AUKUS, with the United Kingdom, of course, and Australia, which is kind of a meaningless institution because Australia gets nuclear submarines in 10 years or probably never. Then you have the Quad Alliance, and obviously that's just going nowhere, and India have joined it and now probably seriously regrets doing so. But again, it's not really doing anything. Obviously, that's got South Korea as well, and South Korea is this vassal state of the United States. But again, not a lot's happening. But why the problem is East Asia or Eurasia is looking at this going, the United States is the aggressor. So the longer they keep pushing this agenda with China, the more they try to sanction China and cut Huawei, destroy Huawei and failing, trying to cut them out the semiconductor chip market, which China is now manufacturing its own. And in a couple of years, it will probably accelerate past the level that the West is producing chips themselves or via TSMC, etc., etc. So that's a complete disaster as well. But again, China's perspective is, well, if you don't do what we want, you can keep destroying your reputation where you're trying to set up this Asian NATO that no one's interested in. And eventually, of course, there comes a point where even these vassal states will have to turn around and realize they're going to be isolated and they're going to walk away from this. But again, the United States is just damaging itself. And why is China going to get in the way? And if, China can retaliate and go, well, if you're going to sanction us and put tariffs on us, we'll stop giving you gallium and germanium. Oh, you can't manufacture chips anymore. And we could do various other measures legitimately because you're hostile towards us. That's going to weaken and damage you in the process. And, and this is why when the US turns up and wants $900 billion of US treasuries bought by the Chinese, they're going to go, no, forget it, it's not happening. And therefore, the argument is, from the Chinese perspective, is we're not going to do anything because we'll never invade Taiwan. They gave the United States a demonstration of what they would do if they were really pushed into a corner, and that is just blockade Taiwan, and in a few days, Taiwan would collapse. And they'd be begging China, saying, yeah, let's unify and let's pretend all this never happened, because most of the people aren't interested, and a large part of the political sort of parties are not interested in hostility with China, and would want unification officially, etc., etc. So China will just sit there and do nothing because they know the United States is causing massive damage to itself. So the argument again is, why get in the way? Just let them do what they're going to do, because we know the United States is never going to go to war with China. It can't go to war with China, right? Rather like the United States couldn't go directly to war with Russia. It's not a reality. So just leave them to it. I mean, and of course, eventually the United States will have to realize and give up doing this. And if the United States walked away and stopped being hostile, well, then China will go fine. And the United States would then stop looking like uh, the failed hegemonic power that it is, stop looking like the aggressor and the bully in the eyes of the global south, and they might start to improve their reputation and restore some credibility. But if you don't want to do that, don't do it. We're not going to stop you. We're not going to end this by the way the United States wants China to end it, by losing their cool and invading Taiwan and going, see, they're the aggressor. Now we can sanction them into oblivion, and you should all join us because Vietnam and the Philippines and all these other countries in Southeast Asia, they'll be after you next because they've taken Taiwan by force. China's too intelligent and understands that that is not the way to end this. So just keep playing the game and keep tightening the screw. And of course, Russia's very happy to allow this to happen. And of course, one of the big headaches now for the United States is the fact that Russia has signed this agreement with North Korea, which is basically Article 5. If anyone attacks North Korea, Russia will go to their aid. So you can immediately see how the South Koreans, the Japanese are going, we don't want any part of this. We just don't get us involved in this. And of course, this has happened because of the aggressive posture of the United States. So in the process, this is weakening nations like South Korea and Japan and weakening their position because they're, like seen as accomplices to the US agenda in the region. But also it's like you say, it's creating development of alliances between countries. I mean, North Korea and Russia, I wouldn't exactly call them allies in the past, but they were got on perfectly well together. But now, they've got these strategic partnerships, and that creates stability in the region. And the US has brought this upon itself because of its behavior. So, I think this highlights very eloquently why neither China and Russia is going to get in the way of the United States destroying itself unless they get precisely what they want. And if they do, that will signal to the world the United States as an hegemonic power is over. And so either way they win. And that's why they're conducting the policies they are, and they won't do anything that actually weakens their position. But the US wants to carry on, leave them to it. Why would you get in the way of them?
There's an interesting thing as well, because it's not just limited to Russia and China. Take a look at the US politics. One of the things that, because of this conflict that has been going on for a year now in West Asia between Israel, Palestine, and pretty much anybody that they, any specter they see is against them, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, you name it. What it's done is it's not just a geopolitical struggle, but it's also become both a religious and a boon for the activists. And it's divided the younger generations who really, didn't grow up in the 60s and 70s and the creation of Israel in 1948 and all these things. They just see on the news, because we have 24-hour news now, not the limited mainstream 3 stations or just the BBC telling people what they think they're supposed to know. It is to the point that it could feasibly alter the election, because who was it, the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan, which is a battleground state, is one of the conclaves in Michigan and Minnesota that is primarily Muslim. That's what most of the town, most of that region is. They have been Democrat for the past, I don't know, 30, 40 years. All of a sudden, they're saying they're not going to vote for Democrat candidate because of the choices that they made. That may be enough to swing the state to Donald Trump and the Republicans, which could then win the election. all because of choices made of standing with uh, a certain party in West Asia. That's just one. Now take a look in Europe. Many of the things that, because of the decisions made, the choices made about sanctioning any ally with Russia. Well, we already know that Europe's economy is going down, France, Germany, and the like. Jaguar, Jaguar is going to has so many vehicles already built that they have not been able to sell. They are shutting down their factories for a year because they just have such an oversupply that nobody's buying. Um, Europe has been trying to, they see the potential of these high-priced EVs because they want it's tied into their Green New Deal and trying to force the public onto them, a public that doesn't want them necessarily, while China now is making inexpensive but very good EV cars. They've proven it all across their entire country. They're ready to export that to the world. And of course, this is now a strong competitor with the declining auto industries. So China has the opportunity to help Europe implement made thanks to them standing with I think I lost my internet
Just for a
again
few
there.
seconds. Carry on. Don't worry.
Okay, good. So the point is that because of choices in regards to following the sanctions imposed upon them by the United States, there is the potential of moving forward with China. And as I mentioned, the Belt and Road was one of them. But China is going to remove and shut down one of their EV battery making factories in Europe. Why? Because there's no longer a demand for European cars because they're too expensive and people don't want them. A lot of these things that could potentially bring Europe out of its recessionary doldrums are being hindered because of choices made by standing with the United States in regards to every single one of these conflicts, choosing the side against all these allies that really don't want to be at odds with Europe, but they have no choice. And because of it, we've got the potential, as I mentioned, for an election to be won in the US and for Europe to fall even further into its economic doldrums, all because of the choices of standing with the US in this imaginary battle against Russia and China. And at a certain point in the conflict, as you've alluded to, China and Russia see, you know what, we're holding our own, we're doing well, we're actually improving, the multipolar world is building, and if we keep this going, the West is going to fall in decline even faster.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to stop. So,
Absolutely. Paul, anyway, as always, thank you for being a part of this great discussion.
and likewise,
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report, thank you for being a part of this community. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, comment, send this out to anybody you think would be important. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.